Lena had always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, and the paranormal were just myths to her, stories people told to explain the unknown. So, when she received an invitation to visit Waverly Manor, a notorious haunted estate, she accepted it with curiosity rather than fear. The manor had been abandoned for over a century, its decaying facade hidden deep within a dense forest. Rumors swirled around the place, stories of mysterious deaths, a family curse, and a ghost that roamed the halls at night. Lena had heard all the tales but brushed them off. She was determined to debunk the myths. Armed with her camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, she arrived at the gates of Waverly Manor just before dusk. The towering iron gates creaked as she pushed them open, revealing a winding path overgrown with weeds. The manor loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the fading sky. As Lena approached the house, a sense of unease washed over her, but she attributed it to the eerie silence of the surrounding woods. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the crunch of her boots on the gravel path. The front door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. She stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick dust that hung in the air. The grand foyer was in ruins, broken furniture, shattered chandeliers, and peeling wallpaper. But despite the state of decay, Lena felt an odd stillness, like the house had been frozen in time. As she explored the manor, taking photos and jotting down notes, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the cracked windows made her heart race. Still, she pressed on, determined to prove that there was nothing supernatural about Waverly Manor. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the house grew darker, the shadows stretching across the walls like long, twisted fingers. Lena switched on her flashlight, its narrow beam flickering slightly as she made her way up the grand staircase. The air grew colder as she ascended, each step echoing through the hollow halls. At the top of the stairs, she found herself in a long corridor lined with portraits. The faces of the Waverly family stared down at her, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved. One portrait, in particular, caught her attention. A young woman with dark hair, her expression solemn, her eyes hollow. The plaque beneath the painting read, "Eleanor Waverly, 1876 to 1899. Lena felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the portrait. Something about Eleanor's eyes unsettled her, as if they were hiding a dark secret. Shaking off the unease, Lena continued down the hallway, her flashlight beam wavering as the battery began to weaken. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed through the house, a faint humming, like a distant lullaby. Lena froze, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway. She hesitated for a moment, then moved toward the source of the sound. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and as Lena pushed it open, the humming stopped. The room was dark, the air thick with the smell of decay. Her flashlight flickered again before dying completely, plunging her into darkness. She cursed under her breath, fumbling in her bag for her spare batteries, when she heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Eleanor." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She spun around, but the room was empty. The whisper came again, closer this time, as though someone was standing right behind her. Eleanor. The name sent a shiver down her spine. She had seen it on the portrait, the woman with the hollow eyes, but there was no one in the room with her. Lena's hands trembled as she switched on her spare flashlight, the weak beam barely illuminating the space around her. And then she saw it, a figure standing in the far corner of the room. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her long hair hanging down over her face. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back, the flashlight beam flickering as it passed over the figure. The woman's head slowly lifted, revealing a pale, expressionless face. Her eyes, dark and empty, locked onto Lena's, and a cold, twisted smile spread across her lips. "Eleanor." The whisper came again, this time from the woman's lips, though her mouth never moved. Lena's blood ran cold as she realized who she was seeing. The portrait. The woman in the portrait, Eleanor Waverly. She wasn't just a myth. She was real, standing in front of her, trapped in the house that had claimed her life. Without warning, the figure began to move toward Lena, its movements slow but deliberate. Panic surged through her, and she stumbled backward, her flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. Darkness enveloped the room, and the soft shuffle of footsteps grew louder. Lena's mind raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had to get out. She had to escape. Blindly, she reached for the door, her fingers brushing against the cold wood, just as she felt an icy hand graze her shoulder. A scream tore from her throat as she yanked the door open and fled down the hallway. The humming started again, louder now, echoing through the house like a haunting melody. Lena's footsteps echoed as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. She reached the grand staircase and nearly tripped in her haste to descend. The house seemed to come alive around her, doors slamming, floorboards creaking, shadows shifting in the corners of her vision. But the worst of it all was the whisper. "Eleanor." The voice followed her, growing louder, closer, until it was all she could hear. She burst through the front door, stumbling out into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The forest was silent, the only sound the rapid thudding of her heart. Lena didn't stop running until she reached her car at the edge of the property. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, before finally getting the engine started. As she sped away from the manor, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the forest, silhouetted against the dark sky, was the figure of a woman in white, her hollow eyes watching Lena as she drove away.